Okay, good morning, everyone. 7 o'clock here at the Pacific Hermitage. Hope everybody's doing okay out there. Let us know if the sound is a problem at all. I think we're getting a pretty good picture from what comments I see. But if the sound is a problem, do let us know. So, what to talk about this morning? It's just a few reflections to get us started, and then we'll, as usual, take some questions from folks. We are experiencing another heat wave here in White Salmon. It was over 100 yesterday and supposed to be over 100 today in town, getting close to that here at the Hermitage. So very warm. And yesterday, some of the smoke from the fires in Washington State and in Oregon, I guess, too, moved in, and we had some unhealthy air yesterday, although it seems to be clearing out a bit today. So yeah, effects from the environment, things that are unpleasant that we wish we didn't have to deal with. COVID surges happening and travel plans being affected, our being able or not being able to meet at Yoga Samadhi on Tuesday nights because of the recent surge. More things that are challenging to deal with for us. So just kind of reflecting on the issue of control and what we have control over, what we don't have control over. And that kind of ties into some of the Buddhist teachings, and we talk about them periodically, because oftentimes people who are familiar with the law of karma think, oh, it's our bad karma that these things are happening, or people who don't believe in karma, attribute it to something else or just pure chance. And whatever the case, whether we think of these kinds of things happening as comically related or not, we tend to take them pretty personally, with a sense of ownership, a sense of I. Why is this happening to me? What can I do to change them? How do I need to respond? All the issues of control start to arise much more clearly when things aren't going our way. So it's useful to kind of reflect on what it is that we have control. What if we do? What do we have control over? What do we don't have control over? Because we can create a lot of suffering around that sense of control and identification, ownership. The Buddha talks about a number of different natural laws, and as we've talked about before, the law of karma is one of those natural laws. And there are other natural laws too that work outside, or at least in conjunction with, but in some ways independently of the law of karma. So like the the niyamas are what are called natural laws, the niyamas, and they're mentioned, I think, mostly in the commentaries, but references to them throughout the teachings. Utaniyama, sort of like the law of the physical universe, the laws of nature. So things like the weather. Do we really have any control over 100-degree heat? No, we don't. I mean, we've influenced it by our burning of fossil fuels and the heating up of the planet. So human effect is definitely doing it. But as individuals in any one moment, we don't really have any personal control over this. And similarly with things like earthquakes and geological things, we're living in a physical world that has its own progression of physical laws. And if we get all upset about certain conditions, fires and the smoke they produce, and the effect that it has on us as breathing beings, then, that just adds even more pain and difficulty to the whole situation. So recognizing that there is this law, these natural laws of nature, physical universe that progress in the way that they do, outside of what our personal interests are. There's also the natural law of kind of like genetics and biology, bija niyama, um, and the fact that we've got these human bodies that have various physiological functions and inheritance from our parents and ancestors in the form of genetics, imprinting, things like that. All the different biological happenings in the universe. COVID, there are viruses out there, and every now and then they take off and spread through certain populations. And this time, it's been the human population, and we thought that we were really getting a handle on it a few months ago. Things were looking good. More people getting vaccinated. The case numbers going down. Uh, Everything opening up. We started teaching at Yoga Samadhi again in person, um, making plans for trips. I've got a trip planned to see my family in another month or so, less than a month, and all of a sudden, we've got a variant, a mutation, and it's causing some difficulties even amongst people who are vaccinated. Um, uh, and, it's sort of like, okay, well, am I going to be able to go back and visit my family in another few weeks, or am I not going to? Are we going to open up at Yoga Samadhi again, or are we not? And not to get too mm, wound up about it, because it's another one of those natural laws. Viruses happen, they affect human beings. Illness happens, and we just don't have that much control over it. Just a modicum of influence about making life a bit more comfortable for us. But we can tweak things here and there in our bodies by how we take care of them and how we look after them. But we don't have any personal control. So why add to the suffering by getting reactive and upset and worried and anxious? That's the natural laws of biology doing what they're doing, and we're experiencing that all the time with our aging bodies. Getting into my mid 60s, starting to notice that it's not always as easy as it used to be to jump up with brightness and clarity at 3:30 in the morning. This morning was actually a pretty good day. I actually woke up even before the usual time and got up and was all bright and alert and came and opened the house up to get it cool down even more and turned the pond water filter on. All this was happening between 3:30 and 4 o'clock in the morning. And I thought, gee, this is unusual, because usually it's kind of lying there for a little while thinking, okay, I dragged myself out, and that's happening more and more. It's just like, gee, it's not like it used to be. um, but how much suffering do we need to make around that? You, if you identify with it, if you kind of move into that kind of negative mind state of kind of grumbling and feeling all grumpy because your body is tired, and then somebody who's cheery and sitting right next to you says, "Good morning." You feel like snarling. But a lot of that is just stuff that, if we had this more of a sense of like, okay, well, this is what a tired body feels like, and it doesn't always produce the most engaging, chirpy kind of personality when your body's kind of dragging along, but not to take that so seriously, and to kind of see if you can just move to that quiet space inside a little bit deeper that just says, "Oh, okay, This is what it feels like when the body is sluggish and tired and non-responsive and fuzzy-minded and, just a little bit on edge, and uncomfortable. Um, it's just a body doing what a body does, and if we can start to get a handle on that in minor situations like this, then when illness and real aging issues start to move in on us, then we have a sense of where we can find a bit of peace and quiet, and we're just kind of moving a bit deeper and just okay. This is just a body doing what a body does. It's the bija niyama, the natural flow of things. You don't have to take it quite so seriously. Oh, and chitta niyama, the laws of the mind, how the mental processes work. These are another natural law. When there's contact with the senses, outside world, sights and sounds and tastes, etc., coming into our sensory experience, there's contact, and there's consciousness and recognition of what's going on, and then immediately perception, identifying something, making sense of the world around us, kind of pulling it into familiar categories and all that kind of stuff, and then the feeling that's associated with it, whether it's pleasant or unpleasant or confusing, those kinds of patterns of experience based on just having contact with the world through the senses. These are all part of the um, mental laws of nature. They're naturally occurring. They arise. Uh, they just arise without much control on our part. How we have patterned ourselves to perceive and feel in relation to sensory impingement, and that includes the realm of thoughts and emotions. So that's a natural law too. And then the kama niyama is the one that started out talking about, and that is that whenever there's a physical mental experience that we have, and it's registered, and then some underlying tendency that's lurking, whether it's towards the underlying tendency of greed or hatred or delusion, irritation, aversion, all those kinds of underlying tendencies that are latent, waiting to kind of awaken. When those kind of pop up and take over in response to a sensory impingement, then we form an intention to act, to speak, to do some sort of action, bodily, physically, or even just a thought, an intentional thought arises. And that's where we start to create karma, working on those underlying tendencies that come in, they swoop over and grab us, and we form an intention and an action from that. So that's the law of karma. And it works in a very natural way when these underlying tendencies are in charge. And then there's the other last one that I can remember, Dhamma niyama, the workings of Dhamma, the laws of Dhamma, so that we start to look at, if we can, if we're smart, we start to look at the experience of our lives through that particular lens. Uh, the laws of the Four Noble Truths, the law, the natural law, the natural truth that there is suffering, um, different kinds of suffering, but specifically of the Four Noble Truths, the natural law that um, when there's ignorance and confusion and underlying tendencies, then we pick up on the world and react to it in a way that can cause unsatisfactoriness and suffering. There's a way to learn not to do that. Um, and we can recognize the cause of the suffering and the cessation of suffering, and practice a path. This is the law of Dhamma, uh, the characteristics of impermanence and suffering, anicca, dukkha, anatta, impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, not self. These are part of the natural laws of Dhamma. So that's our task, is to learn how to understand those. So the modicum of control, getting back to the idea of control that we do have, is being able to remember and recognize how we can perceive the world, how we do perceive the world, and then in the areas where we do have some control, how we respond to the other natural things that are arising. That's using the law of karma wisely to apply it to recognizing and understanding the laws of Dhamma, and how we can uh, let go of and decrease and relinquish some of that unnecessary suffering that we have in our lives. This is the task at hand. That's the Buddha talks about. I teach only two things: suffering and the end of suffering. And the whole path is learning how to use these reflections on the laws of Dhamma, so that we don't have to try and control the things that we don't have any control over, like the laws of nature and weather and physical health and certain mental processes in terms of how we set patterns in motion and have these things happen to us. We don't have to try and control all of those, but yet we do have this modicum of control to recognize, be alert, and react in ways that lead to more understanding and less suffering. So it's kind of a mix, and the path of practice is largely trying to sort out those different influences and learn how to be with them and attend to them skillfully. Often come back to that phrase that you probably hear me say over and over again of reflecting on what we can control and what we can't. With pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. That kind of sums up, I think, a lot of how we have to kind of look at the world, so that we know and react skillfully in ways that lead to less complication, less difficulty, less personal attachment to trying to always get everything the way we want it to be, which is kind of a dead end. But we do have that control to kind of steer our reactions in skillful ways. So I think I just keep that for a short reflection this morning, and we'll say good morning to everybody and take a look at questions that we've got here. Let's see. Just starting with the one down here. We don't have to scroll. Yeah, those are all just greetings. Yeah. Okay, let's see. First question. I've read that the difference between rebirth and reincarnation is that rebirth denies the notion of any soul. Can you talk more about how both differs? Because I'm not sure I get what rebirth is. Okay. Words are just representations of concepts. So probably different people use the words rebirth and reincarnation in different ways. So I'm not sure that there's a one specific definition that applies to everybody who uses those terms. But the way I understand the words is similar to how you say it, that oftentimes people talk about reincarnation as the movement of a soul or an entity, or like a self of some sort, from one physical existence to another, one physical body to another body. And I don't know. I'm not sure if I would use the word that the concept of rebirth denies the notion of any soul, but the way it's used in Buddhism is to recognize that ongoing process of renewal of being. I think might be one way of talking about it. It's just sort of like the constant progression of the becoming energy, the being energy, bhava. BHAVA, becoming process, and that there's a lot of different ways you can look at that and try and explain it, and it refers oftentimes to the continuance of being and beingness, becoming from one physical existence to another. So, like when this physical body deteriorates and passes away, that there is some sort of ongoing momentum that is the condition or the cause for rebirth in another form. That same impulse and movement of mind, those factors that propel us in that becoming way, don't necessarily end with the demise of this physical body, but push on to seek existence. That's another translation or definition of bhava, becoming, is existence or existing into another form. It just that impulse, that movement manifests and pushes into another physical form because of that intense craving for existence, for being, for becoming. So that the way the Buddha describes it is that process, and that process of being or becoming or rebirth, in a sense, happens every moment of our lives, where that constant motion of wanting to be or to exist or to experience moves us from one moment to the next in this very life. So in a more broader sense, rebirth is happening every moment, and that when this body passes away, there's just one more moment of rebirth into the next existence. So it's all part of a natural flow that happens throughout our lives, and that the Buddha's teachings is that this is actually a non-personal, impersonal process that happens without reference to any unchanging entity that is often referred to as a soul or a self. That's where you kind of get into the notions of eternalism, that there's this solid thing that goes from, that exists right now, and that also then gets transferred to another body on the demise of this body. And so the Buddha says, well, we can talk about rebirth and the movement, the momentum of conditioned consciousness, but that it's not a static thing like you would call a soul or a self. It's just an impersonal process happening of mental energy, in a sense, that's based in delusion, greed, hatred, and delusion, not understanding that through the force of grasping and clinging and craving, is propelled onwards from one moment to the next. So that's the underlying cause of this movement, is this tanha and upadana, this craving and this clinging that grabs hold of, under the influence of delusion, not seeing how this all works, that keeps that mental momentum happening, ever seeking fresh delight, now here, now there, in the form of sensory experience or the experience of existence. So maybe Ajahn Lungpa has something to add to that.
No, not really. That's a good kind of summary of the process.
Process of rebirth.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's good to remember, I think, that consciousness, rebirth consciousness, you sometimes hear, all of these things, these are not static things, even things like chitta or mind, these are not static things. These are processes. These are energetic, mental processes that are constantly moving and changing. Okay, let's see. I've been increasingly realizing how much my sense of peace depends on my view, in quotes, of how the world should be. It's difficult to let go of that. Thank you for this talk. You're welcome. Yeah, it is. It's just like we depend on that all the time. That we have this ideal, this notion of the way things should be because we have certain values, and sometimes they're good values. We have values for justice and peace and contentment and equality and equanimity and goodness and kindness. We have these values, and when the world presents things other than that, then it is difficult to let go of all of that. But that's the task to be done. Forgiveness of ourselves and others seems to be the most challenging form of renunciation. Could you comment briefly on this topic? Yeah, it's an interesting conundrum that we get ourselves into, of particularly forgiveness of ourselves. We just like to cling on to something that was a wrong or an injustice, and letting go of that is difficult because we keep on. We're so conditioned to thinking that there's something, rewriting history. Somehow that if we can rewrite history in our lives or in our interactions with other people, then it will make it okay. We have this unpleasant experience and the after effects of it and how it keeps reverberating in our minds. And we keep on refreshing that and bringing it up over and over again. And forgiveness is, it's a real hard task if we keep on chewing over the same stuff all over and over again. It's really hard to let go of that. And it's kind of like it's kind of a graphic on kind of a nasty little image, but it's one that Luang Pa uses all the time, of a dog barfing and then eating its own vomit. So if you find that kind of offensive, well, I get it from my teacher. But it's a very good description of what we do. And how long are we going to keep on doing that? How many meals can we get out of our regurgitated stomach contents? Well, we keep trying. Milk it for what it's worth. But sometimes it's good to reflect on. I think it's harder sometimes to forgive ourselves and to let go of our own difficulties than it is others. And it's good to ask yourself the question of, okay, well, if somebody else were telling me this, how would I feel towards them? And they were going through this and they were constantly rehashing all the difficulties and the injustices, and we're getting all wrapped up and wound up in things that they had no control over, that were in the past. How would we feel if somebody were telling us about that? You'd think, oh, that's not really too bad. I feel sad for this person. Isn't it, too bad that they can't let go of it, and must be very painful. And, if you're reasonably, well thought person with general good considerations, the sense of kindness and compassion starts to come up when you hear somebody else talking about it. So what's keeping us from doing that for ourselves? Why are we any less worthy of that sense of forgiveness? And I think forgiveness is based in a lot of just spacious kindness and compassion, which we can't always bring up right in the moment of something difficult. But if we make that part of our regular reflection and bringing that into our lives and just learning how to create more space in our minds, space where we can hold our mistakes, our imperfections, the fact that even though we're well-intentioned, we miss the mark, all of that can happen much more easily within the context of a very spacious, forgiving, open kind of state of mind. And just by imagining that, it's not something that you personally are the only one in the world who does this, that everybody's gets caught up in all of that kind of stuff of holding on to things, self-criticism, self-blame, and not being able to let things go and to forgive. So just establishing those bases of kindness and compassion all the time as much as you can, so that when the difficult ones come up, it's that much easier to see it with wisdom and to see it just as, okay, this is part of being a human being, and I make mistakes and I learn from them, just as others do. And to, yeah, stop chewing if you don't have to, and realize that. And then sometimes you have to use a fairly strong state of mind to say, okay, enough is enough. I don't need to think about this anymore. If the thoughts tend to get real proliferative and compulsive or obsessive, then you have to take sometimes stronger measures, to kind of to really direct your attention away from them, because they're not useful, and to purposefully put your mind on something more wholesome, or just say, okay, enough. I'm just going to set this aside. So combination of different ways to look at it, but a lot of it for me is just developing that sense of spaciousness around ourselves and our actions and our intentions.
One thing that comes up just as a reflection in terms of forgiveness and say as a form of renunciation is reframing as classically there's different types of dana. So like the amisa dana, so material things as dana, and then Dhamma dana, giving of Dhamma, but abhaya dana is a giving of abhaya as fearlessness or security. But then, say like in the Thai language, it's directly the word abhaya is used as forgiveness. So that seeing forgiveness as an opportunity of generosity,
Gift.
rather than a challenging form of renunciation, something that I have to give. Oh, no, this is something that I can give.
Yeah.
And you can really rise up to giving, whereas sometimes renunciation, I have to, I have to give up my grudge. Oh dear, I have to give up my.
But I like my grudge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that sense of, oh right, generosity, great, and you always feel good giving.
Yeah.
So that giving of forgiveness is something, a way of really generating happiness.
I like that. Takes the pain out of it.
Yeah.
Okay, I got sort of a philosophical question here. Is Nibbana a permanent experience, or is it something that one must practice to maintain? It's I'd probably use the word more like an understanding or realization rather than say experience. Experience tends to objectify something as a word, and similarly, the word permanent, kind of has an implication of unchanging. And in a sense, the nibbana element is, it is, as I understand it from the teachings, once a being has understood and realized perfect enlightenment, nibbana, is completely released, then it is, there's you don't have to go back. It's not something that one must practice to maintain. In a sense, when that has when one has fully relinquished the bases of greed, hatred, and delusion, such that one no longer um, is subject to rebirth due to those kinds of things, and that it's there you go. You're you don't have to make that particular effort any longer. But just to remember that it's not like a something you get that you don't have to give up any longer. It's the culmination of letting go, of relinquishment of everything that you are holding on to in gross or subtle ways, so that it's a release rather than an acquisition. It's a experience or an understanding, a way of seeing reality, the world, and rather than it is an experience, particularly a permanent experience, which, as I was saying, tends to solidify and objectify it. So it's basically, I think, one of the ways I've heard nibbana described is it's basically just the ending of samsara, the ending of suffering, the ending of dukkha, the cessation. It's a cessation of our entanglement and obsession with the world and being and becoming. It's not an annihilation. It's not a refutation, but it's a radical shift of understanding and the understanding of the world and the relationship of how clinging and craving glues us to this realm of conditions. And once we can undo the glue of craving and clinging, then the mind doesn't stick to and adhere to the whole becoming and existence process as we understand it. It becomes released from it. So it's an ending. It's a cessation of the process of suffering.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. And because the question presumes
an experience
that is out there. There's this nibbana out there that I must get and then practice to maintain it.
Right.
And one has to let go of all that. And once one realize the suffering in that presumption, then you have the opportunity to get a feel for what it actually is,
and to let go of that presumption,
and then let go of that presumption as well. You just it's letting go all the way. It's like turtles all the way, all the way down,
all the way down to the bottom. Do the Ajahns have stories or observations of changes in behavior of younger monks over time? Let's see. Probably don't go into specific ones because I don't want to draw.
I could tell the story.
You got a story?
Well, okay, I mean, just from yesterday, we were talking with Ty, and you had me recount my mother's observation about me.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah, so it's sort of okay. There's a young monk, Pasanno bhikkhu, practicing in Thailand, and ordained, living a holy life, and then my parents came to visit me after I'd been a monk for about 8 years, and the very first day that I mean, they arrived one day, and then the next day, spending time with them. We had the meal offering. I was in Bangkok with another monk, and there were two things that my mother was incredibly impressed with. That something's really changed in this person she calls her son, and one was the offering of we went on alms round, and the lay people came and made offerings, a lot of people. So then put food in my alms bowl, chant the blessing, and then usually the lay people go and have their meal. But my mother couldn't resist coming and taking a look at my bowl, because there was inside my bowl all this food. I mean, not mixed up, but it was in my bowl, and it's kind of, it's a fair bit of food, and it's all sort of in its various places. But because I was an incredibly picky eater, it drove my mom nuts. And just to see that the food was actually touching each other in my bowl. Okay, that was impressive for her. And then the other aspect of there's I could harmonize with the other monk. My mother she's a singer. She's in different choral groups when I was growing up, and it was very painful for her to have to hear me trying to sing. But there I was harmonizing with another monk. So then, there's changes. You think, well, it's not much, but it's it's a fair bit. It's these little bits, and it's these little changes that actually give you confidence that you can change, and that big change is really possible.
Yeah, from the little ones.
Yeah,
just like the chanting is sort of like the way I assume the way you did it was just by starting to learn to listen to the other person.
Well, exactly. That's that was actually this. I can, that voice of my mother as I was growing up and as a teenager, say, singing to the radio, and my mother, just this pained expression. You're not listening. And that's exactly because it's just human beings. We're self-absorbed creatures that have our own perception of what the world and ourselves are. So that and listening, paying attention. So mindfulness is all about.
Yeah, one that comes to my mind. Observation of change your mind when this was a young monk. It's just one that for some reason keeps coming up in my mind. I was in the early days, well, still, we getting our property set up at Abhayagiri on the mountain, and the dwelling places that we set up, tent sites and rudimentary initial huts. Many of them were just way up the hill. It's so like, and they still are now, even further. But it was like my tent site, my kuti site was a good 20 minutes uphill walk from the main house, and walking up the road every, after in the afternoon, and then again in the evening after evening puja, particularly in the evening after evening puja, and just constantly grumbling to myself, oh, why don't we build kutis closer to the main area? Why do we have to have them? Why do we have to walk so far? What is this uphill? Grumble. And finally, just doing that long enough and realizing whether or not I grumble and get upset about this, I still am going to have to walk up here if I want to go to my kuti. So I have two choices. I can do it and grumble and be upset and annoyed, or I can just do it and not be grumbled and upset and annoyed. So it's that kind of hard learning, tough love, I guess, kind of a thing that gets ground into one. Okay, one last quick. We'll see if it's quick or not. 7:44 here. What can the Ajahn say about the difference between self-aversion and humility? Americans are so good at self-aversion. What is humility in Buddhism, a quality so important in many religions? Well, I can think of one difference that pops up right away in self-aversion versus humility is the presence or absence of self-view, a lot of self-view. Self-aversion, sometimes we think that that's a positive trait. Oh, I'm so bad. I'm so, I I really am no good. I'm not as good as this other blah blah blah. And it's just this kind of like uh, it's no different than aversion to another person. Aversion to self is the same kind of it's the same aversion. It's just directed inward rather than outward. So aversion is aversion. Humility seems to be almost actually an opposite quality in a sense. It's like when you don't have any particular desire to be seen or noticed or recognized as something particularly important, or no real strong sense of need for praise and recognition and good status, because there's been enough self-effacement, enough reduction in that sense of self, that it's just that kind of attention or focus around me, it just doesn't occur to one, because you just think, well, there's no need for it. There's no interpersonal need to verify and justify an existence of a self in comparison to other people, or as something to be recognized. And that way a person can just walk through the world and be through the world, offering what they can to be helpful, and not being so concerned if they're not being seen or recognized, and that's kind of a sense of humility. It's just, it's a result of the self-effacement process. I think it comes in bits and pieces gradually at time, and then yes, that not needing to draw attention, and not needing to unnecessarily blame oneself. Humility doesn't involve like self-blaming. It just recognizes when one falls short of the mark, and makes constructive efforts to be more skillful, but it's not based on any kind of sense of self, or particularly self-aversion.
Yeah, I mean, I just that stepping back from the whole self program, and then even, especially in English, even the word, I mean, I know we use it in Buddhist terminology of self-effacement, but it has a particular connotation from our Judeo-Christian background as well, which is actually propping up self again, and because we've got to get rid of it. But it's I think another aspect is looking, the qualities of humility is based in respect and gratitude, and so that there is a sense of gratitude and appreciation for oneself and for others, and in the same way that respect for oneself and for others. And so then there's a humility, because you've got a bigger picture that you can let go of the self.
Right. Space for it to dissolve.
Space for it to dissolve.
Speaking of gratitude, I think I've enjoyed the session, and seeing that we're almost 5 minutes past closing time, we probably should wrap up, and we need to get out on our alms round.
Yes, I think there's just that one
another
question from Margaret of any thoughts about particular teachings or practices that would be
helpful to draw close to during this time.
Yeah. I think respect and gratitude.
Respect and gratitude. Yeah. The question was already answered.
Yeah, exactly. That's why draw attention to it, and that's a good wrap it up.
Very good. Okay. See you all the next time.
Okay.
Oh, maybe just a quick have we made a decision about Tuesdays?
I think so.
Yeah, I think we have made our decision. Just for people who might be tuning in and wondering if Tuesday night in-person yoga samadhi is going to start up again. We'll take this opportunity to say that we're just putting it on hold for the time being. We don't know when it will open up again, but we're not going to be doing it until you hear from us. So tune in Tuesdays and Fridays here. We'll still be doing live streams Tuesdays and Fridays, and watch our website for any further announcements about when we might be meeting in person again.
Okay. Take care, everyone. Okay.